Our gospel reading this morning tells us of two miracles that Jesus performed on the same day for two different people. The woman who had the discharge of blood and the young daughter of Jairus, who was one of the leaders of the local synagogue. These accounts are not given one after the other, but rather interwoven in an interesting way. First, we hear the more urgent plea for help. Jairus fell at Jesus' feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." And Jesus responds with the kind of promptness that the situation seems to call for and goes with him. But it's slow going. Jesus attracts crowds, and Mark tells us that a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. We know that it was close quarters, not only from this description, but also from the perplexity of the disciples when Jesus stops and asks who touched him. You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, "Who touched me?" There are a lot of people brushing up against you. Which one do you mean? We can only imagine how frustrating it must have been for Jairus when Jesus stopped to ask this strange question. And even more so when someone answered it and a conversation ensued. The person who answered was the woman with the discharge of blood. She did not have a life-threatening ailment, or at least it wasn't life-threatening yet. She'd had this for 12 years already. She could have waited another day or two. It was hardly an urgent situation, especially when compared with the urgency of Jairus' plea. Maybe that's why the woman was so hesitant about presenting herself to Jesus and asking for a favor. This isn't a good time. He has to help that poor girl. But when am I ever going to be this close again? You know, I could probably just touch his garment and I'd be healed. And that wouldn't distract him. He would never have to know. Oh no, he does know. He's turning around. So much for my stupid plan. Jesus knew, and Jesus stopped. And he asked his improbable question, and she had to answer it. Maybe he caught her eye and she knew that he knew. Or maybe she just felt constrained to give the great prophet, who had just healed her after all, what he demanded. So she came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Why the fear and trembling? Well, whatever made her hesitant in the first place is probably part of this answer. I've suggested one cause, that she didn't want to distract Jesus from his more urgent mission. But she might also have been embarrassed to talk about her condition in front of a big crowd of people. The way the story is told, though, with the crowd pressing in on Jesus and brushing against him, and especially with the detail that Jesus detects what she has done when he perceives that power has gone out from him, I think she's mostly scared because she's just been caught in a stealthy act. She didn't approach Jesus from the front like a normal suppliant would. She didn't bow down before him like Jairus did. She presumed on the healer's goodwill and made off with healing without his say-so. Basically, she feels like she's just been caught picking Jesus' pocket. But Jesus doesn't treat her that way, does he? Yes, he puts her on the spot. He doesn't let her melt away into the crowd unnoticed. But this is so that he can speak to her kindly, so that he can reassure her and bless her. So she doesn't doubt afterwards whether she was supposed to be healed, whether she stole a blessing, something that should have been given. He says to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." Not your cleverness or your boldness or your initiative or your stealth. Nothing that you did, but rather your faith in what I would do. Go in peace. And yes, I know this is a little after the fact because you've already felt the flow of blood dry up. But that you might know that I will to heal you and that you have not defrauded me. Be healed of your disease. And I think Jesus may also speak this plainly for Jairus' sake, because even as he is conversing with this woman, the messengers from Jairus' house are working their way through the crowd with their dreadful news. He lets Jairus see this frightened woman first. Lets him overhear the words, "Daughter, your faith has made you well," right before he learns what has happened to his daughter. And then Jesus turns to him and says, "Do not fear, only believe." The woman in her lesser fear and lesser need is an object lesson for Jairus at his moment of greatest fear and need. She feared, but she was made well. She departed in peace. So it will be for you, Jairus. You fear, but keep believing in me. I helped this woman. I will help your daughter too. And now Jesus tells the crowd to stay behind. He tells most of his disciples to stay behind even, and goes on alone with Peter, James, and John, and Jairus. These two miracles are set up very differently. The woman who touched his cloak attempted to make the miracle secret, and Jesus publicized it. Jairus, on the other hand, has announced his petition before the whole crowd, and many in the crowd have overheard what the messengers have told him. And now Jesus is taking steps to make the miracle that he gives Jairus secret. And this continues. When he gets to the house, he finds a crowd of mourners who react in scorn when he tries to comfort them. The child is not dead, but sleeping. So he clears the room, kicks all the unbelievers out. And by the time he tells the girl to rise from her bed, there are only 5 people watching this miracle. The 3 disciples that he's brought with him, because they're going to be writing his gospel someday, and the parents of the stricken child. And then he strictly charged them that no one should know this. As if that were possible, right? He just cleared a room full of people who knew that she was dead. The moment the little girl steps out of the room, everyone's going to know. Why is Jesus handling the publicity so different in these 2 miracles? St. Mark gives us numerous details as clues that these 2 stories are meant to go together. They're meant to be interpreted together, to be compared and contrasted. To summarize for you, the story of the girl brackets the story of the woman. It's like nesting parentheses. Mark tells us that the girl is 12 years old, and that the woman has suffered her discharge of blood for 12 years. The girl is introduced as Jairus' daughter, and Jesus calls the woman daughter. They are both 12-year-old daughters, because it was 12 years ago that Jairus' child was born, and it was 12 years ago that the woman became the woman with the issue of blood. They are different people, obviously. They're very different situations, but the evangelist wants us to see them as mirror images of one another. He wants us to see them as the same person, as 12-year-old daughters, beloved children who need Jesus' help, the help that only Jesus can bring. Jairus makes his petition publicly. Jesus instructs him to keep the outcome a secret. The woman, on the other hand, makes her petition privately, so privately that Jesus doesn't even know, apparently, that she's doing it until he feels the power go out. But then he leads her to confess it publicly. And that's the point of contrast to which we're being directed. Instead of the one that seems obvious at first glance, which would be the girl needs him more. The girl doesn't need him more. Why does Jesus work so hard to diffuse the publicity in the second miracle? It's because there's so much to diffuse. He starts with a big crowd that starts following him because he's going to heal a child belonging to an important man. There's plenty in that to interest the crowd. And then they hear that the child's actually died. But Jesus is still giving assurances to the man, so now it's just got twice as interesting. This is going to be a lot of spectacle. But Jesus tells them to stay behind. He even leaves 9 of his 12 disciples behind, just to make it smaller, just to make it more intimate. And then when he gets on the scene, he clears the house because he finds another spectacle there. This is the spectacle of grief this time, everybody mourning and wailing loudly. And probably many of these were professional mourners, because such a thing existed back then in that culture. Loud public displays of this kind were one of the ways that their culture solemnized grief. And this helps us understand why these mourners were able to switch so quickly from lamenting to laughing at Jesus with the arrogant scorn of professionals who've been questioned by an amateur. But the real mourners, the actually bereaved, the parents, Jairus and his wife, stay quiet and watch Jesus, who is so powerful, who is exuding such confidence that it kept their hope alive too. Jesus doesn't want our spectacle. Jesus doesn't want our pomp. Jesus doesn't want our way of determining who needs him more and which miracle is the bigger deal. By cutting down on this, both crowds, by thrusting the secretly healed woman into the spotlight in front of the crowd instead, he is teaching us to regard these two miracles as equally important, even as the same miracle. Beloved 12-year-old daughters who need the healing that only he can bring. The girl's case is so much more urgent. The girl's case is so much more spectacular. The girl, as a victim, seems to us to be more sympathetic, both because she's a child and because her father is an important man. The woman herself seems to agree with these judgments. She doesn't want to be a bother. She doesn't want to hold Jesus up. She would prefer to remain a face in the crowd. But Jesus has none of it. Look here, he says to us. Yes, look here at this woman. Don't look over there. Pay no attention to the resurrection behind the curtain. That news is going to get out. I can't stop that news to get out. I tried, but everyone's going to know about it like 15 minutes from now. That news is going to get out. Look over here. You're not going to even notice this one if I don't point it out to you. Jesus cares about your little problems just as much as he cares about your big problems. Even if you don't. Whatever weighs on your mind, whatever makes you weary by pressing down year after year, weary of this world and sick. He cares about the grief that everyone else forgot about 10 years ago. But that still makes you blue. That still makes you cry once a week, once a month, whatever. You have Jesus' sympathy as much as the parents whose child died this morning. He cares about your nagging health problems as much as he cares about someone else's cancer. Why? Because he loves you with a perfect love. The great physician doesn't triage his patients. The lover of mankind doesn't have a limited amount that he can only lavish on a few people at a time. He loves you with a perfect love, and he sees all of your problems as one problem. That is the problem of death. We're all dying. With some of us, it's just a little more obvious. And worse than that, we deserve to die. We have sinned, every one of us. And we continue to sin. We are, in fact, sinners. And our condemnation is just. We have one problem that manifests in many ways, and this is the problem he came to save us from. First, to take away our guilt on the cross, to sympathize with us in the tightest way possible, because sympathy is suffering with someone. That's what the word means. And second, by his glorious resurrection, to take away our death and all the suffering that goes along with it. In his eyes, we all have the same problem. And he is the cure for it, for every manifestation of it. He loves you, he forgives you, and he offers you his body this morning, cloaked in bread, so that you can touch him by touching his garment. You can touch and you can eat the very source of your righteousness and life, so that the power can flow out of him and into you, and you can go in peace, forgiven and assured of everlasting life and health in the world that is to come. In the name of Jesus, amen.